She was worth $3 billion and had never once been surprised by a man, until the night he turned down $1 million deal and walked away from her without looking back. What happens when the most powerful woman in the city falls for a man who wants absolutely nothing from her? When wealth becomes the very thing standing between two people who could have been everything to each other. This is not a love story about money. It is a story about what people are willing to destroy and what they refuse to surrender. If this story moves you, hit like and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The charity gala was held on the 42nd floor of the Caldwell Tower, and from up there, on a clear October night, you could see the whole city lit up like someone had scattered a handful of diamonds across dark velvet. Logan Hayes had been to exactly one event like this in his adult life, and that one had been a client dinner where nobody talked to him and he spent 40 minutes pretending to read the menu. He had worn the same suit tonight that he had worn to his ex-wife's cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It still fit, mostly, except across the shoulders where he'd put on some muscle from hauling stone and scaffolding. He'd had to leave the top button of the jacket undone. His friend Marcus had told him it would be fine. "You look distinguished," Marcus had said, straightening Logan's lapel in the elevator. "Architectural restoration is distinguished. Historic preservation is distinguished. You are a distinguished man." "I look like someone's assistant," Logan said. "You look like someone who could be an assistant to someone important, which is exactly the energy we want at a networking event." Logan had not laughed at that. He still didn't think it was funny. The gala itself was for the Westfield Cultural Preservation Fund, which was the kind of organization whose name sounded important enough that wealthy people donated to it without asking too many questions. Logan actually knew what it did. He'd worked with their grant division twice, both times applying for funding to restore crumbling pre-war facades in the Ellsworth district. Both times he'd been rejected. Still, Marcus had gotten him a ticket through a client connection, and Logan's business partner Renata had told him, in no uncertain terms, that if he did not go and make at least 3 useful contacts, she would renegotiate his share of their partnership agreement. Renata did not make empty threats. So here he was, the event planner, a young woman with an earpiece and the focused expression of someone running military operations, handed him a place card and pointed him toward table 11. Logan moved through the crowd carefully. He was not a small man, 6'1", with hands that still showed the work even when he cleaned them up. And rooms like this always made him feel slightly too large, slightly too rough-edged for the surfaces around him. Table 11 was near the window. Good view, he thought. That was something. He found his seat and stood behind it for a moment, scanning the table. There were 8 chairs. 3 other guests were already seated. A man in his 50s with a silver pocket square, a younger couple who were talking to each other and not making eye contact with anyone else. The remaining seats were empty. Logan sat down, set his phone face down on the table, and poured himself a glass of water from the carafe. He was reading the back of the menu, lamb, halibut, a mushroom risotto, when the energy at the table shifted. He noticed it before he looked up. A slight change in the quality of attention in the nearby crowd, the way people's eyes moved without their heads following. He'd felt that kind of awareness in buildings before, the way a room changes when someone opens a load-bearing wall, a kind of held-breath quality to the air. He looked up. Victoria Sterling walked toward table 11 alone. Logan knew who she was in a general way, the kind of general way you know a senator or a famous architect, as a name that appears in news feeds and gets mentioned in business conversations. Sterling Capital, Sterling Properties. The Sterling Urban Renewal Initiative that had apparently transformed the Garner Port area into something resembling a real neighborhood instead of a wasteland. She was on 2 or 3 boards he could think of offhand. Forbes had run a profile on her 18 months ago with a cover image he vaguely remembered. Her standing in front of a glass building, arms crossed, expression flat. She looked different in person, not smaller, the way famous people sometimes do. More exact, maybe. Sharper. She was wearing a dark navy dress that didn't try to announce itself, and her hair was silver at the temples with dark brown through the length of it, worn back simply. She carried no clutch, no assistant at her elbow. She moved through the gala the way someone moves through a building they own, without hurry, without performance. She sat down in the chair directly to Logan's left. He nodded at her. She nodded back. Brief, professional. No different from how she might nod at a waiter. The man with the silver pocket square stood up slightly and extended his hand across the table. Ms. Sterling, what an unexpected pleasure. Gerald Marsh, Marsh Development. We met briefly at the Henley conference. Yes, Victoria said without particular warmth. She shook his hand once, firmly, then turned to the menu. Logan watched Gerald Marsh sit back down with the expression of a man who'd just had a door closed politely in his face. Then Logan turned back to his own menu and decided on the lamb. It was another 10 minutes before anyone at the table spoke to him directly. You're not going to introduce yourself? Victoria said. He looked over. She was still reading the menu, but her eyes had shifted toward him slightly. I figured you'd get to me eventually, Logan said. That surprised her. He could tell because her chin lifted almost imperceptibly. Most people don't wait. Most people aren't me. She set the menu down and looked at him properly for the first time. It was a direct, assessing kind of look, the sort that tried to categorize and file quickly. He held it without performing anything. Not confidence, not deference, just a kind of easy steadiness that was just how his face worked. Victoria Sterling, she said. Logan Hayes. He didn't offer a company name or title. She hadn't asked. What do you do, Logan Hayes? Architectural restoration. I run a small firm. We work on historic buildings. Pre-war mostly, some mid-century. Structural rehabilitation, facade work, interior preservation. Small firm. 4 full-time, 2 contract. We're growing. He paused. Slowly. She seemed to consider that. Why slowly? Because the work we do is detail work. You can't scale it the same way you scale new construction. Every building has its own history, its own failure points. You have to understand what you're working with before you can fix it. Most developers don't think that way. Most developers don't care about the building. They care about the footprint. Victoria looked at him again, longer this time. That sounds like something someone says when they've lost a bid to a developer. It sounds like that because it's also true. She almost smiled. It didn't quite reach the surface, but it was there, somewhere. Fair enough, she said. The first course arrived. They didn't talk much during the soup. Logan found himself watching the room between bites. Not in the obvious way, not scanning for connections to make, just observing. He noticed how many people glanced at their table, how many eyes moved from Victoria to him and back, with that particular quality of assessment that wasn't really curiosity so much as calculation. He'd seen that look before. On project sites when he showed up without a hard hat or a clipboard and the general contractor's team tried to figure out where he fit in the hierarchy. It was a look that was trying to find the leverage. A woman at the adjacent table, blonde, mid-40s, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Logan's truck, leaned toward her companion and said something behind her hand. Her companion laughed. Both of them looked at Logan. He looked back evenly until they looked away. Victoria had noticed. She had an angle on the room that Logan didn't, and he caught the slight shift in her jaw, the particular flatness that came into her eyes. Not hurt. Something older than hurt, accustomed. You get that a lot, he said. It wasn't a question. People making assumptions? She lifted her wine glass. Constantly. What are they assuming right now? That you're either very ambitious or very lucky. Which one do you think? She studied him over the rim of her glass. I think you're neither. I think you're here because someone made you come and you're trying to make the best of it. Logan laughed. Genuinely, without thinking. It came out quiet and a little rough, the way laughs do when they're actual. Marcus told me I'd make useful contacts. Marcus is an optimist. Marcus is a project manager. They have to be. She set her glass down. Something had loosened slightly in the way she was holding herself. Not much, but enough that Logan noticed the difference. Tell me about the buildings, she said. What about them? The ones you restore. What draws you to them? He leaned back slightly in his chair, thinking about how to answer that honestly rather than professionally. There's a building on Carver Street, he said, in the Ellsworth district. Three-story brick built in 1923. It was a dry goods warehouse originally, then a garment factory, then a community theater, then it sat empty for about 20 years before I first looked at it. Every layer of that building's life was still in the walls. You could see where they'd reinforced the floors for the heavy machinery, and then later where someone had painted over it in this bright yellow that the theater must have chosen in the 70s. The brick facade had 4 different phases of mortar repair visible if you knew what to look for. He paused, trying to find the end of the thought. Most people look at a building like that and see liability. I look at it and see, I don't know, everything that happened inside it. All the people who came through those doors and never knew they were making history. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Did you restore it? We're currently 18 months into a 3-year project, yes. Who's funding it? Community development grants, some private donors, and frankly some of my own business credit that Renata, my partner, would murder me for if she knew the full extent of it. He picked up his fork. But it's going to be worth it. You sound certain. About the building? Yes. About everything else in my life? He shrugged. Less so. It was more than he usually said at professional events. He wasn't sure why he'd said it. Something about the way she asked questions, not the way people ask questions when they're networking, building toward an ask, or positioning a pitch, but the way someone asks when they actually want to know. You have a family? She said. The question was careful, neutral, but not disinterested. A daughter, Maisie. She's 7. He said it the way he always said it. Matter of fact, no performance, but the word daughter landed with a weight that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite pain and was something specific to fathers raising children alone. She lives with me. Just the 2 of you? Her mother and I split when Maisie was 3. It was mutual, or mutual enough. He turned his wine glass by the stem. It's fine. We figured out a rhythm. Maisie's a better roommate than most adults I know. What does she think of old buildings? She thinks they're haunted. He smiled at the table. Which means she finds them interesting. She comes to job sites sometimes on Saturdays, wears a little hard hat that we had custom fitted. She calls herself the building doctor. Victoria Sterling laughed. It was brief, and it clearly surprised her. She pressed her fingers to her lips for a half second, as if she hadn't been expecting it. The laugh was real, though, unguarded. Nothing like the professional version of a smile she'd been offering the rest of the table. Logan looked at her. She'd probably like you, he said. You have the same expression she gets when she's thinking about something hard. What expression is that? Like you're already 3 moves ahead, but you're still checking your work. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You're very strange for a networking event, she said. I'm very strange in general, Logan said. The networking event is just showing it in relief. Holds. By the time the main course was cleared, the room had settled into its mid-gala pattern. The formal programming had ended, the speeches had been made, and people were circulating with drinks and the low hum of deal-making disguised as small talk. Gerald Marsh had moved on to pursue a conversation at another table. The young couple had slipped away entirely. Logan had not moved. Neither had Victoria. They'd been talking for 2 hours. He wasn't certain how it had happened. The conversation had just kept going the way a river keeps going, not because either of them pushed it, but because the terrain kept opening up. She had told him about the Garner Port project, not the public version with the polished metrics and the ribbon-cutting photographs, but the actual version, with the city council member who'd tried to kill the rezoning 3 separate times, and the community group that had staged a sit-in on the proposed demolition site. And the moment she'd finally gotten the infrastructure financing to work by restructuring 2 other deals simultaneously in the same week. That sounds exhausting, Logan said. It was the best month of that entire year, Victoria said. And she meant it. He could hear it. Why? Because it was a real problem, not a political problem or an optics problem, an actual structural challenge that required an actual solution. She turned her wine glass. Most of what I do now is manage people managing other people. I miss when the work was the work. What did you start in? Real estate finance. Small deals first. I grew up in Eastmoor. Do you know it? East Side, off the industrial corridor. I worked on a row house project out there 6 years ago. Then you know what it looked like. The neighborhood I grew up in was 12 square blocks that nobody from outside it ever thought about. My mother managed a laundry. My father worked shifts at the Port Authority. She said it flatly, without the performed pride some people attach to origin stories. I was not born into any of this. I built it. I know, Logan said. You knew that before tonight? The Forbes piece, 18 months ago. He saw her expression. I read industry press. You've been involved in preservation funding in this city. That makes you relevant to my work. You read the article about me for professional reasons. And now I'm talking to you for personal reasons, he said. So things evolved. She held his gaze. You say things very directly. Does it bother you? No, she said, and then seemed slightly surprised to hear herself say it. It doesn't. Outside the window, the city glittered. Logan watched a plane moving across the eastern sky, its lights blinking slow and steady, and thought, not for the first time that evening, that he should probably go work the room, find the contacts Marcus had pointed him toward, do what he'd actually come to do. He didn't move. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things all evening. This one's different. He turned in his chair to face her more directly. What do you actually want? Not from the gala, not from the fund, generally, in your life. She went still. Not the professional stillness, a different kind, the kind that comes when a question lands somewhere undefended. Why do you ask that? She said. Because you've been talking about work for 2 hours, and you're very good at it, and I don't think work is your answer. The silence stretched out between them, and Logan let it, because he'd learned a long time ago on job sites that some silences were working silences, and interrupting them just meant you had to start over. Quiet, Victoria finally said. I want quiet. Meaning peace? Meaning, she stopped, started again. Meaning, I want to sit in a room with someone and not have them be calculating something, not wondering what I'm worth to their portfolio or their career or their profile. She looked at him. I want the room to be quiet. Logan nodded slowly. That makes sense. Does it? It's what I wanted after my marriage ended. I didn't want less. I just wanted what was there to be real. He reached for his water glass. Took me about 2 years to get comfortable with the quiet when Maisie was asleep. Used to fill it with work, music, anything. Now I kind of like it. 2 years, she said, as if she were calculating something. Give or take, you have to grieve the noise before you can appreciate what's left. Victoria looked at him the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find in a place you'd been before. Like turning a corner in a familiar building and finding a door that wasn't on the blueprints. You're not what I expected, she said. You didn't expect anything. You sat down next to a stranger. I expected nothing worth talking to, she said, and the honesty of it was blunt enough that she looked away slightly after she said it, as if she'd given away more than she'd intended. Logan didn't press it. I'm glad I'm an exception. So am I, she said quietly. He found Marcus at the bar around 10:30 and accepted the drink his friend pressed into his hand. You've been at that table for 3 hours, Marcus said, keeping his voice low with the effort of someone trying very hard not to sound excited. The conversation was good. Logan, that is Victoria Sterling. I know who she is. She does not sit at a table and talk to one person for 3 hours. I have watched her at 4 of these events, and she is in and out in 90 minutes, shakes 20 hands, leaves. She has never... Marcus, I'm just noting. I know what you're noting. Logan drank. It was a good conversation. That's all it was. Is that all it was? Logan was quiet for a moment. Across the room, he could see Victoria standing with 2 men in their 60s, bored types, the kind with firm handshakes and flat eyes, and she had resumed the professional version of herself, the careful, controlled version. She was nodding at something one of them was saying with precisely calibrated attentiveness, and Logan noticed, though he wished he hadn't, that she looked slightly more tired than she had an hour ago. She's a lonely person, Logan said. Marcus stared at him. I'm not saying that like it's romantic. I'm saying it factually. She's surrounded by people all the time, and she's genuinely alone. Logan set his glass down. That's a particular kind of hard. You talked about loneliness with Victoria Sterling. We talked about a lot of things. Marcus was still staring. You know I sent you here to make business contacts. I know. Did you make any business contacts? Logan looked across the room again. Victoria had glanced up briefly, found him at the bar, and then looked away again immediately, the way you look away from something you didn't intend to look at. Not the kind you were thinking of, Logan said. He didn't get her number that night. They parted in the lobby. His car was in the structure across the street. Hers was waiting at the curb, a black SUV with a driver who held the door open without being asked. She shook his hand, which was the professional version of goodbye. Firm, brief, final. It was a good conversation, she said. Best one I've had in a while, he said honestly. Something moved in her eyes. Then she nodded, got in the car, and was gone. Logan stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and breathed out slowly. The city made its constant noise around him, cabs, voices, the distant percussion of a delivery truck over a grate. A woman laughed somewhere. A door slammed. He thought about Maisie at home with his neighbor, Mrs. Patel, probably already asleep by now, probably curled into that tight comma shape she favored with her stuffed elephant tucked under her chin. He thought about Victoria Sterling saying, "I want the room to be quiet," in a voice that had almost nothing left to protect it. He started walking toward the garage. He was halfway across the street when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. The Ellsworth Restoration Project. I read about it 2 years ago in an architectural review. The article didn't mention the engineer. It mentioned a contractor who turned down a buyout offer from Carver Development to save the historic overlay zone. Logan stopped in the middle of the crosswalk. That was you, wasn't it? He looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed back. That was me. A pause. Then, why didn't you say so? You didn't ask. Another pause. Longer. Good night, Logan Hayes. Good night, Victoria. He stood there in the intersection until a cab honked at him, and then he moved. But even walking up the garage ramp, keys in hand, he was smiling in the dark in a way he hadn't smiled in a long time. Not the kind you perform for a room, but the quiet kind, the one that just happens, the one you don't entirely understand yet, but know somewhere behind your sternum is the beginning of something. He didn't know if that was a good thing. He didn't know if it mattered. He got in his truck and drove home to his daughter, and the city slid past the windows in streaks of gold and dark. And somewhere across town, he thought, Victoria Sterling was in the back of that black car watching the same lights, and maybe, he didn't know, maybe thinking the same unanswerable thing. That sometimes the seat you're given at a table is the one you were always supposed to find. Or maybe that was just the kind of thought you had at 11 o'clock on a cold October night when you'd talked to someone for 3 hours and couldn't quite explain why it felt like you'd known them longer. Either way, he drove home, and he did not stop thinking about her the entire way. The text started 3 days later. Not a phone call. Logan hadn't expected a phone call. Victoria Sterling did not seem like a woman who called people without scheduling at first. But the text came in the evening, after 9, which he'd come to understand was when her day finally exhaled. The first one was a question about the structural challenges of cast iron facades. He'd answered it, gone back to his sketch work, and found himself checking his phone 20 minutes later with a feeling he recognized and didn't entirely trust. She asked good questions. That was the thing. Not the kind designed to sound interested. The kind that meant she'd actually been thinking about what he'd said and had followed it somewhere on her own. The mortar cracking you described in the Ellsworth building. Is that a moisture infiltration issue or load-bearing settlement? Both, usually. They compound each other. You fix one without the other and you're just buying time. How long does it take to diagnose correctly? Depends on the building. The honest ones show you fast. The ones with bad previous repairs take longer. You're excavating through other people's mistakes. That sounds like most things. He'd stared at that last message for a moment, then typed back. Yeah, it does. She didn't reply after that, but he hadn't expected her to. That was something he'd already noticed. She didn't extend conversations past the point where they had something to say. No filler, no ha-ha, or anyway, or, well, I should let you go. She just stopped when she was done, and there was something almost restful about that. Maisie found him smiling at his phone one morning over breakfast and gave him the look, the narrow-eyed, head-tilted look she'd developed sometime around age 6 that meant she was assembling data. "Who are you texting?" "A work contact." "Work contacts don't make you do that face." "What face?" Maisie pointed at him with her spoon. "That one." Logan put his phone face down on the table and pushed her oatmeal closer. "Eat your breakfast." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying. Eat." She ate, but she kept watching him with that data-assembling expression, and Logan had the uncomfortable feeling that his 7-year-old understood more about what was happening than he did. So, they met for coffee the following Tuesday, which had been Victoria's suggestion and phrased with such deliberate casualness, if you're in the downtown area this week, that Logan had understood she'd spent some time deciding how to word it. He was in the downtown area. He said so. The place she'd chosen was not what he expected, not the polished hotel bar sort of venue he'd have predicted for someone of her profile, but a narrow coffee shop on Merchant Street with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that was so densely written it required actual commitment to read. He was there first, which turned out to matter because he watched her come in. She was in a coat, dark charcoal, her hair down for the first time. He'd only seen it pulled back, and she scanned the room when she entered with that same efficient read-the-space quality he'd noticed at the gala. When she found him into the corner, something in her shoulders released, just slightly, in a way that probably nobody else would notice. He noticed. "I've walked past this place 100 times, she said, sitting down. "Never gone in." "Why not?" "I don't usually have time for the kind of coffee shop where you stay." "You made time today." She looked at the menu on the chalkboard rather than at him. "I did." They ordered. The coffee came in ceramic mugs with small handles, the kind Logan's mother used to have in her kitchen cabinet. Victoria held hers with both hands and looked at it for a moment, as if she'd forgotten how to simply sit in a room without an agenda attached to it. "Bad week?" he asked. "Average week," she said. "Which is bad by most metrics." She drank. "We have a development proposal moving through the City Planning Commission. There are 4 competing interests, 3 of which are actively misrepresenting the impact projections, and the 4th is a community advocacy group that is correct about everything and has no idea how to make their case to people who don't want to hear it." "Which side are you on?" "The 4th." She set her mug down. "Which is inconvenient because Sterling Capital is the developer." Logan looked at her. "You're advocating against your own project?" "I'm advocating for the right version of the project. There's a difference." She pressed her fingers flat on the table. The original plan gutted the Harlan Street residential corridor, 47 occupied units. I killed that version internally 3 months ago. The current plan preserves 39 of them and improves the surrounding infrastructure. But the advocacy group doesn't know about the revision yet because our communications team is... She stopped herself. "They're slow." "Why are they slow?" "Because communicating nuance to an angry public is harder than communicating a simple enemy narrative, and my communications team would prefer a simple narrative." "So tell the advocacy group yourself." She looked at him. "That's not how institutional communication works." "I know how institutional communication works. I'm asking why you're letting it work that way when you clearly know it's the wrong call." Victoria was quiet. It was that working silence again, the one he'd learned to leave alone. He drank his coffee and looked at the exposed brick on the wall behind her. Standard coursework, probably 1940s, tuck-pointed twice, nice original character through the paint layers. "Because if I go around my communications department," she said carefully, "I create an internal rift that will cost me more political capital than the project is worth." "Is the project worth more than 47 families?" She looked at him with an expression that was not quite irritation and not quite something else. "That's not a fair comparison." "No," he said, "it's not, but it's the one you're already making." She picked up her mug, put it down, picked it up again. He had the sense she was deciding whether to be annoyed with him and choosing, by some internal calculation, not to be. "I already fixed it," she said. 39 units preserved. I handled the internal process wrong." "Then go tell the advocacy group." "Logan? I'm not trying to make your job harder. I just think the reason you're telling me this is because you already know what you should do." The coffee shop made its noises around them. The grinder, someone's laptop keys, a conversation at the counter about something mundane. Victoria looked at him the way she'd looked at him that first night. The reading look, except this time there was something more open in it. "You do that?" she said. "Do what?" "Say the thing directly, without the diplomatic wrapping." "Does it bother you?" "I told you before." "No." "Then why mention it?" She almost smiled. "Because I'm not used to it. I'm surrounded by people who are very, very good at saying nothing with a lot of words." She turned her mug in a slow circle. "You say the actual thing." "That's just how I talk." "I know, that's what I'm telling you." He looked at her. She was looking at the table, and there was something in the set of her jaw. Not vulnerability exactly, but the area adjacent to it. The place where someone very controlled lets themselves feel something they're not sure they should feel. "Victoria." She looked up. "Go talk to the advocacy group," he said. She held his gaze. Then she exhaled through her nose, quiet and controlled, and nodded once. "Fine." "Fine?" "Fine." She picked up her mug. "Stop looking at me like I've done something impressive." "I'm not." "You are. I'm just relieved you're not going to let 47 families get steamrolled because your communications department is slow." 39. Close enough. She laughed, and this time she didn't cover it. What? The photographs appeared online on a Thursday. Someone at the gala had taken them. The angle suggested a phone camera held low, which meant deliberate, not accidental. There were 4 images. Logan and Victoria at the table, heads angled toward each other in conversation. Victoria laughing, which was apparently unusual enough to be notable. One from the lobby, their handshake, and one that was clearly taken from outside through the window of the Merchant Street coffee shop. Them across the table from each other, both holding mugs, close enough in the frame that it looked like considerably more than coffee. The caption on the first account to post them was, in retrospect, designed for maximum damage. Does Victoria Sterling's new consultant charge by the hour? By Friday morning, it had been picked up by 2 business gossip columns and 1 general entertainment site. By Friday afternoon, it was on a financial news aggregator under the headline, "Sterling's Judgment Under Question as Mysterious Companion Revealed." By Friday evening, Logan's name was attached to it, along with a 40-word description of his company that managed to make small firm architectural restoration sound like a euphemism. Logan found out the same way most people found out things they'd rather not know, from someone else. Marcus called him at 6:45 while he was making Maisie's dinner. "I need you to not react badly to what I'm about to tell you," Marcus said. "That is a very bad opening sentence. I need you to be calm." Logan transferred the phone to his other ear and turned the stove down. "Tell me." Marcus told him. He was quiet for a moment after. Maisie was at the kitchen table drawing, head bent, tongue between her teeth, not paying attention to him. The drawing was of a building, because lately most of her drawings were of buildings. She'd started adding little people in the windows. "Okay," Logan said. "Okay?" Marcus repeated. "That's... Logan, they're calling you a gold digger." "I heard you." "Does that not..." "It bothers me," Logan said, keeping his voice flat and even, conscious of Maisie 6 feet away. "It bothers me a lot, but getting loud about it doesn't help, so I'm being quiet for now." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Have you talked to Victoria?" "Not yet." "Are you going to?" Logan looked at Maisie's drawing. She'd added a small figure on the roof of her building, which was possibly meant to be him. "Yes," he said, "but not tonight." He texted Victoria after Maisie was in bed. "I saw it. 3 minutes. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated this. You didn't take the photos, I know, but I know how this city works, and I should have been more careful." He sat with that for a minute, the careful phrasing of it, the way she'd taken responsibility for something that wasn't her fault. He typed back, "You don't need to be sorry. Are you okay?" A longer pause. "I've had worse weeks. That's not what I asked." The pause was long enough that he thought she might not answer. "No, not entirely. Me either. Logan, if you want to step back from, whatever this is, I understand. I don't want this to cost you anything." He looked at that message for a long time. The apartment was quiet. The way it got quiet at night when Maisie was asleep, that particular quality of stillness he'd once tried to fill with noise and now mostly just inhabited. I don't step back from things because they get uncomfortable, he typed. That's not how I'm built. I noticed. Don't flatter me, I'm not. I'm observing. He smiled at his phone, alone in his apartment, and felt the peculiar mix of warmth and unease that had been following him around for 2 weeks now. Get some sleep, he wrote. You too. Victoria. What? The advocacy group. Did you call them? The pause was shorter this time. Wednesday morning, 2-hour meeting. They were furious. Then they were relieved. Then they cried, which I did not know how to handle. What did you do? Sat there. Let them. Logan leaned back against his couch cushions and thought about Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in the city, sitting in a room while a group of community advocates cried and not knowing what to do and doing the right thing anyway. That was the right call, he wrote. I know, she said. Good night, Logan. Good night. The week that followed was the kind that tested what a person was made of in the particular way that public embarrassment tests, not dramatically, but steadily, with the grinding persistence of water working through cracked mortar. At a site meeting on the Ellsworth project, one of the contractors made a comment. Not to Logan directly, to another worker, angled to be heard. Something about lucky breaks and rich connections. Logan looked at the man, said nothing, and then called him into the foreman's trailer and told him clearly that it would not happen again. The man apologized. Logan wasn't sure the apology was genuine, but it stopped. Renata came by the office on Thursday with coffee and the expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd been preparing. I'm not going to tell you your personal life is my business, she said. Good, Logan said. Because it isn't. But the company is my business. She set his coffee on his drafting table. And right now the company is being mentioned in gossip columns as an accessory to a supposed scandal involving one of the most watched investors in this city. There's no scandal. I know there's no scandal. I know you, Logan, but I also know that 3 of our pending grant applications go through committees where the optics matter. And if someone on those committees reads Mysterious Companion and decides they'd rather not, Renata. She stopped. I know, he said. I'm aware of the risk. I'm not being reckless. She looked at him steadily. Renata had known him for 8 years, since the earliest days of the firm, when it was barely a firm and they were both working out of the back of his truck. She knew his tells. Is it serious? She said. With her? He moved a pencil on his drafting table. I don't know what it is yet. That's not a no. It's an honest answer. Renata picked up her own coffee. She looked out the office window at the street for a moment. She came to the advocacy group meeting, she said. Logan looked up. How do you know that? My cousin is on the Harlan Street tenant board. Renata turned from the window. She said Victoria Sterling walked in, sat down with the community group, and spent 2 hours listening to everything they were upset about, and then showed them the revised plan herself. Line by line. Renata paused. My cousin said she expected a corporate runaround and instead got an actual explanation from someone who clearly cared whether the answer was right. Logan was quiet. I'm not telling you what to do, Renata said. I just thought you should know what kind of person you're dealing with. I know what kind of person she is. Do you? Renata looked at him. Because from the outside, Logan, it's easy to see what you're offering her. You're decent and direct, and you treat her like a person. That's rare in her world, apparently. She set her cup down. I'm asking if you know what she can offer you, not financially, as a person. He thought about it honestly. He thought about the laugh she'd surprised herself with at the gala, and the text about the advocacy group. They cried, which I did not know how to handle, and the quality of her questions, the way she stopped talking when she had nothing left to say. Yeah, he said. I think I do. Renata nodded once, the way she nodded when she'd gotten the answer she was checking for. Okay, she said, then be careful. Not because of the columns, because you matter. And Maisie matters. I know. And Logan, she picked up her jacket, fix the Ellsworth drainage issue before Friday, or I'm deducting it from your draw. It's already fixed. I know. I just wanted to end the conversation professionally. Victoria called him for the first time on a Sunday afternoon. He was on a ladder in the back hallway of the Ellsworth building, inspecting a section of original plaster cornice that one of the contractors had been overcleaning, when his phone buzzed against his leg. He came down, checked the number, and answered. "You called," he said. "I do occasionally call people." "I wasn't sure." "Don't be smart." A pause. He could hear the quality of her room through the phone. Quiet, wide, something with good acoustics. "I need to tell you something." He moved away from the work area, stepping through a doorway into what would eventually be the restored lobby. Late afternoon light came through the covered windows in thin strips. "Okay," he said. "The board met Friday. An informal session. Nothing on record, nothing binding. But two of my directors raised your name. Specifically, they raised the media coverage and the implication that my judgment may be compromised." She said it with the flat, controlled delivery she used when she was managing something that was making her angry. They didn't say it directly. They used phrases like outside distraction and reputational exposure. Logan was quiet. "I told them," Victoria continued, "that my judgment was not a matter for board discussion, and that if they had concerns about Sterling Capital's direction, they could submit them formally, and I would address them in that context." "How'd that go over?" "Like a stone through a window." A beat. "They backed down, for now. But Logan, I want you to know that this is likely to escalate. People in my position don't have private lives. Or rather, they do. But those lives become leverage, and She stopped, started again. "I wanted you to know what you're adjacent to before it gets worse." "Worse how?" "I don't know yet. That's what I'm telling you. I don't know what shape it takes, and I'm not able to promise you it won't be significant." He looked at the covered windows, the light cutting through in strips, the original marble floor beneath the construction dust. He thought about what it had taken to get this building to this point. The city inspector who'd tried to fail 3 separate systems on questionable grounds. The financing gap that had kept him awake for 4 months. The contractor who'd walked off in February and left him short-handed in the middle of a structural repair. He was familiar with things getting worse before they got better. It was basically his professional specialty. "Victoria," he said. "What?" "What do you want? Not strategically, not the board answer. What do you actually want?" The silence was long, and the apartment sound came through again. That wide, quiet room with good acoustics and nobody else in it. "I want to not have to make that calculation," she said finally. "I want to... I don't know. I want to have coffee at a bad coffee shop and talk about buildings and not have it become a liability assessment." "Then let's do that," Logan said. "It's not that simple." "I know, but as a preference, as a thing you want, that's it?" "Yes," she said. "That's it." "Okay," he said. "Then we start there." Another silence. Different quality to this one. Not working silence. Something softer. "You're very uncomplicated," she said. "I really am not. Ask Renata." "Who is Renata?" "My business partner. She was just explaining to me all the ways I'm complicated." "What did she say?" "That I matter, and that Maisie matters." He paused. "She's right about both." He heard Victoria shift on whatever she was sitting on. A couch, maybe, or a window seat. Something that allowed for the quality of stillness she carried into phone calls. "Tell me about Maisie," she said. It was different from the first time she'd asked, back at the gala. That had been polite curiosity. This was something else. So he did. He sat down on the dusty marble floor of the future lobby of the Ellsworth building, in the thin afternoon light coming through covered windows, and talked about his daughter, about how she argued with him about bedtime with the confidence of a small, absolute authority, about the building drawings she left around the apartment in stacks, about the morning she'd found a spider in the bathroom, and instead of screaming had crouched down to observe it for 10 minutes until she could tell Logan everything the spider was doing and theorize at length about where it was going. Victoria listened the way she did everything, with full attention, asking questions when she had them, quiet when she didn't. "She sounds formidable," Victoria said when he paused. She's 7, and she terrifies me on a regular basis, Logan said, which I say with enormous pride. He heard the smile in Victoria's voice when she answered, even though he couldn't see it. I'm starting to understand where she gets it from. She gets it from her mother mostly. Elaine was the sharper one. And you? I'm the stubborn one. He looked at the dusty marble under his hand. I keep showing up to things long after reasonable people would have quit. A pause. Yes, Victoria said quietly. I'm beginning to see that. The afternoon light shifted, the strips through the covered windows going amber to gold. The old buildings settled around him the way old buildings did, the slow voice of wood and stone speaking the language of time, and Logan sat in it and thought, not for the first time, not for the last, that some things, like some buildings, were worth a great deal more than their current condition suggested. You just had to know what you were looking at. The offer arrived on a Wednesday, in a plain envelope delivered to the office by courier, which should have been the first sign that something was wrong. Legitimate business proposals came by email, by referral, by phone call, preceded by 3 layers of assistant. They did not arrive in plain envelopes from couriers who didn't make eye contact. Logan opened it at his drafting table while Renata was on a call in the back room. The letter inside was 2 pages, clean typeface, no letterhead. It outlined a development contract worth $1.4 million, a historic rehabilitation project in the Caldwell Arts District, fully funded, materials and labor, with a completion timeline that was generous to the point of being almost unrealistic. The scope of work was exactly the kind Logan's firm was built for. The client was listed as a private investment group operating under a holding name he didn't recognize. He read it twice. Then he set it down and stared at his drafting table for a while. Renata appeared in the doorway. "You have your bad face on," she said. He handed her the letter without comment. She read it standing up, and he watched her expression move through interest, then confusion, then the particular stillness that meant she was running calculations he couldn't see. "This is real money," she said. "I know. The scope is exactly our wheelhouse. I know. The timeline is generous? Yes, I know." She looked at him. "You think it's from Victoria?" "I don't know, but people are going to think it's from Victoria, which is almost the same problem. Logan, if she's trying to—" "She's not trying to do anything," he said, and heard the sharpness in his own voice and dialed it back. "I don't think it's her, but I also don't know who it is, and that envelope did not come through any normal channel." He took the letter back. "I'm not signing anything until I know exactly where this came from. What if it's legitimate? Then it'll still be legitimate after I investigate it." Renata held his gaze for a moment. She had the expression she reserved for when she disagreed with him, but respected the reasoning. "Fine. But Logan, we need this. The Ellsworth draw is tight, the Carver facade project went over budget, and I've been floating our payroll on a line of credit that makes me nervous every single month." "I know." He set the letter face down on his table. "I'll find out where it's from. Then we'll decide." He didn't call Victoria that night. He sat with it instead. The discomfort of not knowing, the particular ugliness of a situation where the right thing and the expedient thing were pulling in opposite directions. He thought about what Renata had said. He thought about what the right answer would look like if nobody was watching, and what it would look like if everybody was. They were the same answer, which was the only way he knew how to operate, but that didn't make it easier. Maisie found him at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock, which meant she'd gotten out of bed for the 3rd time that week, and this time hadn't bothered with the usual pretexts of needing water or having a bad dream. "You're thinking loud," she said. "I'm thinking quietly. I just look like I'm thinking loud." She climbed into the chair beside him and pulled her knees up. She was wearing the pajamas with the small yellow moons on them, and her hair was the mess it always was after sleep. She looked at him with dark eyes that were, at this particular moment, uncomfortably perceptive for a 7-year-old. "Is it about the lady?" she said. He looked at her. "What lady?" "The one who texted you. You get a different face." "I don't get a different face." Maisie said nothing, which was somehow worse than if she'd argued. "It's about work," Logan said. "It's a work problem." "Is the work problem about the lady?" He exhaled. "Partially." She nodded, solemn, and leaned her head against his arm the way she'd done since she was small, not asking for comfort so much as offering it, which was one of those things about her that caught him off guard sometimes, the quiet way she gave without being asked. "It'll be okay," she said. "You don't know that." "I know." She shrugged the small shrug she used when she was being deliberately philosophical. "But it usually is." He put his arm around her and thought that she was right more often than she should be at 7 years old, and also that he needed to stop working at the kitchen table at 10 o'clock because it was becoming a problem. "Go to bed," he said. "Okay." She slid off the chair, then she stopped. "Daddy?" "What?" "I want to meet the lady." He looked at her. She held his gaze with all the absolute confidence of someone who has decided the conversation is over and is simply waiting for reality to catch up. "Good night, Maisie." "Good night." She padded off to her room. He sat in the kitchen alone and thought that his daughter was the most competent person in their apartment by a significant margin. He called Victoria the next morning early before her day got away from her. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to ask you something directly," he said, "and I need a direct answer." A beat. "All right. Did you arrange a contract offer for my company through a holding group, delivered by Courier Wednesday?" The silence that followed was long enough that his stomach tightened before she spoke. "No," she said. Her voice was flat and immediate. "I did not." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Logan, I would not—" She stopped, started again with more control. "I would never do that without your knowledge. That would be treating you like a charity project, and that is not how I see you. And honestly, it's not how I operate." He breathed out slowly. "Why?" she said, and the single word was careful. "What happened?" He told her about the envelope, the untraceable holding company, the perfect scope, the improbably generous terms. He told her about Renata's concern and his own, and the fact that by Friday morning, 2 financial journalists had already picked up rumors that Logan Hayes was about to receive a significant development contract, the implication being that sterling money was behind it. He heard her processing it on the other end. The quality of her silence was different from the other kind. This was operational. He could almost feel the gears. "This wasn't random," she said. "No. Someone built this to look like me." Her voice had gone quiet, which he'd come to understand was more dangerous than if she'd raised it. "They want you to believe I went around you, or they want the public to believe it. Either way, they're trying to create a version of events where you're either a recipient of my money or a man too proud to accept it and walking away. Which gives them the story they want. Which ends this." She said the last word with a precision that was harder to hear than anger would have been. "Whatever this is, whoever arranged it wants it to end. You're bored. Possibly. Or someone connected to them. Or someone who simply benefits from my attention being divided right now." She paused. "There are currently 4 parties who do not want my focus on the Caldwell District Development Review. The timing is not coincidental." Logan pressed his hand flat on his drafting table. "I'm going to reject the offer." "Logan, I'm not taking money I didn't earn from a source I can't verify. That's not political. That's just who I am." "I understand that, but if you reject it publicly—" "I'm going to reject it publicly." He said it the way he said things when they were decided. "I'm going to be clear that I don't know where it came from, and I'm not accepting it, and if someone has an accusation to make about my character or my work, they can make it directly." Victoria was quiet. "Are you going to tell me that's the wrong move?" he said. "No." Her voice had shifted. "I'm going to tell you it's a very expensive move and you should do it anyway." "I know." "Logan." A pause. "I'm sorry. This is my world bleeding into yours, and you shouldn't have to stop apologizing for things you didn't do. I'm apologizing for the situation. The situation is not your fault." He looked at the early light coming through the office window, gray November light, the kind that didn't commit to anything. "Some things are just hard. That's not the same as someone's fault." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, less boardroom, more her. "You know, most people in your position would take the money. I know. And most people would find a justification that made it feel clean. I know that too. Why don't you?" He thought about it honestly before answering. Because Maisie is going to grow up watching what I do when it's hard. And I want her to see someone who didn't find a way to make the wrong thing convenient. The silence on the other end had a quality he couldn't name exactly. Not sadness. Something more like recognition. The sound of someone hearing a sentence that lands somewhere they'd forgotten they had. She's lucky, Victoria said quietly. She'd argue that. She's not allowed to stay up past 8:30. He heard the smile in it even through the phone. Do what you need to do, she said. And Logan, be prepared for the fallout. I've been in buildings that were actively collapsing, he said. I'll manage. Ch-ch-chub. The statement Logan released on Friday afternoon was 4 sentences long, which was exactly 4 sentences longer than he was comfortable writing about himself in public, and which Renata had edited down from 7 sentences because she said he was editorializing in a way that makes you sound righteous, which was fair. It read, Hayes Restoration has received an unsolicited contract offer from an unidentified holding entity. We are unable to verify the source or legitimacy of this offer. Hayes Restoration does not accept contracts from unverifiable sources regardless of value. We earn our work. That last sentence was the one Renata had tried to cut and he'd kept. The response was not small. By Saturday morning, he had 43 media requests, which he did not answer. His personal inbox had been found somehow and contained a mix of support messages, conspiracy theories, and at least one job offer from a competitor that he found faintly insulting in its timing. A financial news channel ran a segment that managed to frame his rejection of an unverified offer as evidence of either integrity or stubbornness, depending on which analyst was speaking, and one commentator said flat out that a man in his financial position turning down 7 figures is either very principled or very foolish, and the line between those two things is usually a woman. Logan read that one, set his phone down, and went and made coffee and did not pick the phone up again for 2 hours. Marcus came over Saturday afternoon while Maisie was at her mother's, ostensibly to help Logan review the Ellsworth budget projections, but actually to process the week at Logan's kitchen table with 2 beers and the honest conversation that men who've known each other a long time sometimes need. The board is the story, Marcus said. Whoever sent that offer was trying to either humiliate you or humiliate her, and now they've got neither, and they're angry. I know. Are you worried? Logan turned his beer bottle in a slow circle. About the company? Yes. About myself? He thought about it. Less than I expected. Why less? Because I know I did the right thing. That's a cleaner feeling than I usually get to have. Marcus nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said, How is she? Logan knew who he meant. Handling it in her way, which means internally and strategically and not with any visible distress that I can detect. But I know her well enough now to know that visible and actual aren't the same thing. Marcus looked at him. They'd known each other since college, through Logan's marriage and the dissolution of it, through the early years of the firm and the year Logan's father died and the year Maisie was born. Marcus had the particular kind of attention that longtime friends had, the kind that didn't need to ask certain questions because it already knew the answer. You're in it, Marcus said. I know. Deep. I know that too. Does she know? Logan looked at the table. He thought about Maisie saying, I want to meet the lady with the absolute confidence of someone who had already decided it was real. He thought about Victoria on the phone saying whatever this is, and the way she'd said it, not dismissively, but carefully, like something she was handling with both hands. I think she knows, he said. I think we're both pretending there's more time to figure out what to call it. Marcus drank his beer. And the age thing, 16 years, doesn't matter to me. It might matter to people. People have been mattering about us since the first photograph. It hasn't changed anything. Logan met Marcus's eyes. She's the most interesting person I've sat across a table from in 10 years. She asks questions that go somewhere. She listens like it counts. She walked into a room full of people who were angry at her company and sat down and listened for 2 hours and then fixed the thing herself. He paused. What 16 years are you seeing that outweighs that? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his beer. I'm not seeing anything that outweighs it, he said. I was checking whether you were. I'm not. Good. Marcus tipped his bottle slightly. Then stop calling it figuring out what to call it and call it what it is. Logan didn't answer that, but he didn't argue it either. The shareholder communication came on a Monday. Not a formal notice, but a letter forwarded to Logan through an intermediary he didn't know, which told him the intermediary was being deliberately deniable. The letter was from 3 members of Victoria's board, unnamed, addressed to no one in particular but clearly designed to reach him. It described the current media climate around Sterling Capital as untenable. It described the board's concern for the company's institutional integrity, and in language that was crafted to be unlitigable while being entirely clear, it suggested that a man of Logan's evident integrity would understand that some associations, however personally meaningful, carry costs that extend beyond the individuals involved. It was in the most precise sense a threat delivered like a suggestion. Logan read it at his drafting table. Then he folded it and put it in his desk drawer and called Victoria. She answered on the first ring, which was new. "I know," she said before he spoke. "They sent it to me." "I know. They also sent it to 2 journalists, which they believe was untraceable and which was not." Her voice was controlled in that way that meant something was being held down underneath it. "They're trying to force my hand through you. If you step back, I look isolated, and they have the leverage to push the board vote. If you don't step back, they have an ongoing narrative that questions my judgment." "Neither of those is acceptable," Logan said. "No." A pause. "Logan, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him put down the pencil he'd been holding. "Tell me." "There's a shareholders meeting at the end of the month. A formal session, agenda items, recorded minutes. 2 of the 3 board members in question intend to raise a formal motion." She took a breath that was almost imperceptible. "They're going to recommend I step down as chair." The office was quiet around him. He could hear the faint street noise 2 floors below, the work sounds from the Ellsworth project a block away. "On what grounds?" he said. "Diminished focus and reputational exposure." She said the phrase the way you repeat back something someone has said to you when you want them to hear how it sounds, which in plain language means that I have the audacity to have a personal life that the board finds inconvenient. Can they do it? They have the votes to force a discussion. Whether they have the votes to carry the motion depends on how the remaining shareholders respond. A beat. "I've spent 20 years building this company, and I have the majority of shares. But institutional shareholders are a different calculation, and if the narrative is unstable enough, people vote for stability over loyalty." Logan was quiet, turning this over in his mind the way he turned structural problems over, looking at the load paths, the failure points, the place where the stress was actually concentrated. "What are you going to do?" he said. "I'm going to go to the meeting," she said. "I'm going to sit at the head of the table and address every one of their concerns, and then I'm going to make the case for the company's next 5 years in a way that none of them can argue with." She paused. "That's what I'm going to do professionally." "And personally?" The silence stretched. "Personally," she said slowly, "I keep thinking about what you said, about wanting what's there to be real." She stopped, took a moment. "I haven't wanted something for myself in a long time, Logan. Not specifically for me, not connected to the company or the work or what it looks like, just something that belongs to me." Another pause. "You're the first thing in years that fits that description." He sat very still. "I don't know what to do with that," she continued, and the admission had an edge of rawness to it that she couldn't entirely smooth. "I'm not practiced at it. I'm better at the board meeting than I am at this conversation." "I know," he said. "That doesn't frustrate you?" "No, I've been watching you figure it out in real time. It's not frustrating." He paused. "It's one of the most honest things I've seen from another person in a long time." She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, but something had been laid down in it, something more weight-bearing than before. "The meeting is the 28th. I know. I'll be fine. I know that too." "Logan." "What?" "Maisie," she said, "you mentioned she comes to job sites on Saturdays." He blinked at the unexpected turn. "She does." "I'd like to—" She stopped herself, recalibrated. "I was wondering if perhaps sometime I could—" Another stop. He could hear her working against the instinct to phrase it professionally. "I want to meet her," she said finally, simply. "If that's something you'd consider." Logan pressed his hand flat on the drafting table and looked at the thin November light on the wall and felt something open in his chest with a quiet creaking sound, like a door that hasn't been used in a long time but was always there. "I'd consider it," he said. A beat. "She already asked about you," he said. "She doesn't know me." "She knows about you? She called you the lady." He heard Victoria's small intake of breath. Surprise. Something warmer than surprise. "She's 7. She wants to meet you. I'd say she's already made up her mind." "She sounds like you." "She's better than me. I told you." The call went quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet. The room with no calculation kind, the kind Victoria had said she wanted, and that they'd been building together without exactly saying so, 5 minutes at a time, one honest conversation at a time over the last 5 weeks. "After the meeting," Victoria said, "after the 28th, when this is sorted, we'll figure out a time." "After the 28th, Logan agreed. "I mean it. I know you do." Another pause. "Logan," she said. His name and her voice had a different quality than it had had at the beginning, less careful, more itself. "I know," he said, before she could finish. Because he did know. He wasn't sure when that had happened, but he knew. She hung up without another word, which was very her, and he sat alone in his office in the November light and thought about 28 days and the particular weight of caring about someone whose world was trying to make caring about them as expensive as possible. He didn't regret it. That surprised him a little. After everything the past 2 weeks had cost, the press, the contract, the look on Renata's face when she'd tallied the grant committee risk, the contractor's sideways comment on the Ellsworth site, he sat there and turned it all over and found, underneath all of it, the same unshifted thing. He didn't regret a single conversation. He didn't regret the coffee shop or the Sunday phone call or telling her directly what she already knew about the advocacy group or any of the quiet evenings texting about buildings and board meetings and the particular difficulty of being responsible for things that mattered. He thought about Maisie saying it'll be okay the way she said it, not naively, but with the simple assurance of someone who has watched her father get back up enough times to believe that getting back up is just what people do. He thought she was probably right. He picked up his pencil and went back to work. The week before the shareholders' meeting, Logan found out where the contract offer had come from. It was Renata who traced it, methodically and without being asked, the way she handled most problems that Logan was too close to see clearly. She'd spent 2 weeks pulling on threads, the holding company name, the courier service, the specific legal language in the contract letter that had a regional fingerprint, if you knew what to look for. She came into the office on a Tuesday morning, set a printed summary on his drafting table, and stood back the way she stood back when she was letting the information do the work. He read it. The contract offer had originated from a private coordinating group. No formal name, no registered entity, operating through a network of individual donors and community stakeholders. 7 names were attached to the summary. He recognized 2 of them immediately, a retired city planner who'd publicly opposed the Carver development buyout 4 years ago, and the director of the Eastmore Community Housing Trust, which was the neighborhood Victoria had grown up in. A third name was the former chair of the Westfield Cultural Preservation Fund, the same organization whose gala had put Logan at table 11 6 weeks ago. He read the summary twice. Then he sat back and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed out slowly through his nose. "They weren't trying to give you money," Renata said. "They were trying to recognize you. The language they used internally, I found a forwarded email in the courier company's records request, which they should not have included but did. They called it an integrity acknowledgement. They'd been tracking your Ellsworth work for 2 years. The Carver buyout thing, 3 other projects where you took less profit to do the thing right. Why the anonymous holding company? Because they knew you'd research it. They thought the anonymity would give you a cleaner decision, accept the work on its merits without feeling obligated to any individual." She paused. "They did not anticipate that you'd read it as suspicious." Logan was quiet. "They also did not anticipate the media context," Renata said. "The Victoria situation. They released the offer before the photographs were a story. By the time it arrived, the whole thing had already been framed wrong. He looked at the names again. 7 people who had watched his work for 2 years and decided, quietly and without announcement, that it deserved recognition. 7 people who had no connection to Victoria Sterling, no agenda connected to the board, no leverage to gain. I rejected their offer publicly, he said. Yes, and implied it might be corrupt. You implied it was unverifiable, which it was, from your position. Renata's voice was even. You did the right thing with the information you had. That's the only standard. They were trying to do something good. They were. And their intentions are going to matter once this gets out. She tapped the summary. Because this changes the story completely. Logan thought about Victoria thinking the offer had been designed to manipulate them. He thought about the board members using it as evidence of compromised judgment. He thought about the financial commentator on television saying the line between principle and foolishness was usually a woman. He picked up his phone. Not yet, Renata said. He looked at her. Think it through first. Victoria needs to know before anyone else, and you need to understand what this does to the board narrative before it goes public. She sat down across from him. If this comes out, that the offer was from community leaders who admire your work, that it had nothing to do with her, it doesn't just clear you. It reverses the entire framing. The board members who used this to attack her judgment look like they were weaponizing a misunderstanding. That's a different kind of meeting on the 28th. Logan set his phone down. He looked at the window. Gray December light, a week out from the solstice, the days cut short, and the city running on artificial warmth. She needs to know, he said. Call her first. Then we figure out how to let the truth move through correctly. He nodded. But before he reached for the phone, he looked at the names on the summary one more time, and something in his chest did a thing he didn't entirely expect. Not vindication, not relief, but something closer to gratitude. The particular kind you feel when you find out the world is slightly less cynical than you'd braced yourself to believe. He called Victoria. She was in a car when she answered, on her way back from a meeting that he could tell from her voice had been difficult. She listened without interrupting while he read her the key points. He heard her breathing change. Say that again, she said. The names. He read them. A silence. Daniel Frey, she said. The retired city planner. Yes. He was on the opposition side of the Garnerport rezoning. We were on opposite sides for 18 months. Her voice had an odd quality to it now. Not quite disbelief, something more complex. He's been publicly critical of Sterling Capital 3 times that I can remember. And he still signed on to recognize your... Logan paused, then chose the word honestly. Your person. Another silence. Longer. They did this because of you, she said finally. Not because of me. They did it because of what they saw me do, which is different from doing it for me. Logan? Her voice was careful, the way she was careful when she was feeling something she wasn't certain of. This changes the 28th. I know. If this gets out before the meeting, if the board members who used your contract as ammunition find out that ammunition came from community leaders who admire the person they were using it against, they lose the narrative. They lose the credibility of the attack. That's what Renata said. Renata is correct. He heard the car moving, the soft urban texture of traffic. How do we release it? Carefully. It has to come from a verifiable source, ideally from the group themselves, on their own terms. If it comes from us, it looks strategic. Can you reach them? Renata found contact information. He looked at the summary. I'd rather go in person. A pause. You'd rather explain to the people who tried to honor you that you publicly questioned their integrity. Yes. Most people would let Renata make a phone call. I know. Victoria was quiet for a moment. He could picture her in the back of the black car, the city moving past the window, that particular expression she had when she was deciding whether to say the things she was thinking. Go, she said. Go in person. It's the right move, and it's also very you, which I am no longer surprised by. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. A beat. Take it as you like. He almost smiled. How are you? He said. Not the 28th, you. The pause was longer than most questions warranted, which was its own answer. I'm tired, she said, and the two words had more truth in them than a longer sentence would have. I'm tired of performing certainty I don't entirely feel. I'm tired of the calculation. Every conversation weighed for leverage. Every relationship assessed for risk. A breath. I'm tired of being in my own life like it's a board meeting. That's not nothing to admit. No. She paused. It's easier to say to you than to most people. Why? Because you're not going to file it somewhere and use it later. He thought about that, about what it meant to move through the world, never fully trusting that honesty wouldn't become a liability. That must be exhausting, he said. It is. A beat. The coffee shop was the first time in a long time I forgot to calculate, and then somebody took a photograph through the window, so... She left the sentence incomplete in a way that didn't need finishing. After the 28th, Logan said, when it's through. After the 28th, she agreed. Then, Logan. What? Thank you for not being someone who makes me feel like the calculation was right. He didn't have a clean answer to that, so he just said, get some sleep before the meeting. I'll sleep after the meeting. That's not what I said. She hung up, which was still very her. He drove out to Eastmoor the next morning. Daniel Frey lived in a row house on the same 12-block grid Victoria had described. Narrow streets, working-class architecture. The kind of neighborhood that got called up and coming every decade or so without ever quite changing. Frey answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses, which he pushed up his nose when he saw Logan and said, with the dry composure of a man in his 70s who had seen most things, I was wondering when you'd come. You were expecting me. I was expecting someone. Come in. The living room was cluttered with books and the particular organized chaos of a person who does most of their serious thinking at home. Frey gestured at a chair and sat across from him without ceremony. I owe you an apology, Logan said. No. Frey shook his head once. You did what anyone with sense would do. Unverifiable source, poorly timed, wrong context. You protected your integrity. That's what we were trying to recognize in the first place. He folded his hands. The mistake was ours. We should have disclosed ourselves from the start. Why didn't you? Frey was quiet for a moment, the way older people are quiet. Not stalling, just thinking at the pace the thought required. Because we didn't want you to feel obligated. We didn't want the recognition to become a relationship. We've watched you work for 2 years, Mr. Hayes. We've seen what you do when nobody's watching. We wanted to give you something clean. He paused. It didn't come out clean. No, Logan said. It didn't. He looked at the bookshelves behind Frey, decades of urban planning texts and neighborhood histories. Can I ask how you found out about Carver, the buyout? A contractor who worked on the overlay zone petition told me. He said a 30-year-old restoration firm owner had turned down a development payment that would have covered 3 years of business expenses because he didn't want to lose the historic designation on a 12-block neighborhood. Frey looked at him steadily. In this city, in this industry, that kind of decision is not common. It wasn't heroic, it was just right. Most people in your position would have found a way to make the wrong thing feel right. That's what I mean. Frey unfolded his hands. We weren't giving you charity. We were giving you work you'd already earned 3 times over. Logan looked at the floor for a moment. He was not someone who easily accepted this kind of direct acknowledgement. It sat in him uncomfortably, like too much light. I need to ask something of you, he said. Ask. The timing matters. The way this comes out matters. He explained the board situation, the shareholders' meeting, the way the contract offer had been weaponized in a way the group had never intended. Frey listened with the focused quiet of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where information was leverage. When Logan finished, Frey said, You want us to make a public statement. I want you to tell the truth on your own terms, before the 28th, but not in a way that looks like a coordinated defense. Just your account, your names, your reasons. Frey looked at him for a long moment. You're trying to protect her. Logan met his eyes. I'm trying to make sure the truth gets out before someone else shapes it. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. No, they're not. Frey was quiet again. Then he nodded, a single slow nod. I'll reach out to the others today. We'll draft something by Thursday. He paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, what we've seen reported about Miss Sterling and the Harlan Street situation. The community meeting. That was not the action of someone whose judgment is compromised. That was someone doing the right thing in a complicated situation. I know, Logan said. I thought you should hear it from someone outside your immediate circle. Logan thought about Renata saying almost the same thing in the office a month ago. He thought about the way truth sometimes needed to come from multiple directions before it fully landed. Thank you, he said, and meant it. The statement from the community group went out on a Thursday afternoon, emailed to 6 journalists, posted on the Eastmore Community Housing Trust's website, and forwarded by 3 of the 7 signatories to their own professional networks. It was 2 paragraphs long, specific, and unambiguous. It named the group, explained the intent, confirmed the offer had been composed before the media coverage began, and stated clearly that no connection to Sterling Capital existed. The story moved fast. By Thursday evening, 2 of the financial journalists who'd run the original speculation pieces had published corrections. By Friday morning, a larger outlet had run a full context piece. The comment sections were, predictably, a mix of genuine engagement and people who had already formed opinions and were not available for revision, but the record was corrected in the places that mattered. Logan read the coverage in his office, then closed his laptop and went to the Ellsworth site to do actual work, because the building did not care about media cycles and the cornice wasn't going to restore itself. He was on a scaffold at the building's 3rd-floor exterior, reviewing the mortar joint work with his site lead, when his phone buzzed. He checked it, because he'd been checking it more often than was professionally dignified lately. A text from Victoria. The board called an emergency session this morning. He climbed down from the scaffold and moved away from the work noise. How did it go? He typed. Marsh and the 2 others withdrew the motion. He stood in the December cold and read that twice. They withdrew it? Formally. In writing. Delivered to the full board by 9 a.m. A pause. I believe the phrase tactical retreat applies. Are you okay? A longer pause than he expected. I'm sitting in my office and I haven't moved in 20 minutes. I think that means something. It means you can breathe. I'm trying to remember how that works. A beat. I keep waiting for the next thing. There might not be a next thing. In my experience, there's always a next thing. In mine too. But sometimes there's a gap between the last thing and the next thing. You're in the gap. She didn't respond for a moment. He could picture her in the wide office he'd never seen. The room with the good acoustics, the quiet that she wanted and didn't quite know how to inhabit yet. Logan. What? The 28th is 3 days away. I know, I meant what I said. After the meeting. A pause. Maisie. He looked up at the Ellsworth building above him. The restored brick, the cleaned-up facade, the new mortar sitting correctly in the joints for the first time in 60 years. It was not a perfect restoration. It was an honest one. All the history of it was still visible to anyone who knew how to look. She's free Saturday afternoon, he typed. If you want. The pause before her response was the longest one since they'd started texting 6 weeks ago. Long enough that he thought she might be deciding against it, and the feeling that produced in him told him more clearly than anything else had so far exactly where he'd landed on the question Marcus had asked him in his kitchen. Saturday, she wrote. Yes. He put his phone in his pocket and stood in the cold for a moment with his hands in his jacket and looked at the building and felt, not happiness exactly, but the settled, specific satisfaction of someone who has been working towards something real and can feel it getting closer. He went back up the scaffold. The shareholders' meeting on the 28th was not what anyone in that room had prepared for. Logan knew this because Victoria had called him the night before, at 11:15, when Maisie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and talked him through her preparation in the way she sometimes did, not asking for advice, just needing to hear herself say it to someone who was actually listening. I'm going to address the full board, she said, not just the 3, all of them. I'm going to lay out the Caldwell District Plan, the Harlan Street revision, the 5-year capital allocation. I'm going to give them the company's next chapter in enough detail that nobody walks out of that room with questions. Good. I'm also going to address the personal situation directly. He was quiet. I'm not going to apologize for it, she said, with a flatness that was the opposite of defensiveness. I'm not going to explain it or justify it. I'm going to state, on the record, that my personal life is my own, that it has not compromised a single business decision, and that any board member who believes otherwise is welcome to make that case formally, and I will respond to it formally. How do you think they'll respond? I think the 3 who withdrew the motion are now calculating their own positions and would very much like this to be over. I think the remaining board members are mostly practical people who want the company to run well and will vote accordingly once I give them something to vote for. A pause. And I think there are 2 people in that room who are going to try to create a scene regardless, because at this point it's not about the company, it's about saving face. What do you do with those 2? I let them talk, she said, and then I respond with facts, which is how you neutralize a performance, not by matching the volume, but by declining to perform. He thought about that. You've done this before. I've been in difficult rooms before. This one has different stakes. Another pause, and then, with a quality that was quieter than the rest, I've never had something I was actually fighting to keep before. Not personally. He didn't answer immediately. He sat in the quiet of his apartment and let that sentence be what it was. You're going to be fine, he said, not because it's easy, because you know what's true and you know how to make other people see it. I'm not certain of that tonight. I know, that's normal. The certainty comes back in the morning. She exhaled. Is this what you say to yourself before difficult jobs? I say worse things to myself before difficult jobs. I'm trying to be more helpful to you than I am to myself. She almost laughed. Not quite, but close. I appreciate that. Victoria? What? I mean it. You've got this. A long pause. Good night, Logan, she said. Good night. He stayed awake another hour after that, not working, just sitting in the apartment quiet. He thought about what she'd said, something I was actually fighting to keep. He turned it over and found it unchanged from every direction, solid, the kind of thing that held weight. He thought about Saturday. He thought about Maisie, who had been told only that she would be meeting someone on Saturday afternoon, and who had responded with careful nonchalance that lasted approximately 45 minutes before she began asking questions, each one more specific than the last, until Logan had confirmed enough details that she'd gone to bed Friday night clearly constructing something in her head that he hoped reality could live up to. He thought about Victoria in the wide, quiet office, preparing for a room full of people who had tried to reduce what she'd built to a liability column, and the image of her sitting at the head of that table, composed, direct, exactly herself, made something in him settle the way things settle when you recognize that someone is equal to the moment in front of them. He didn't know what the meeting would produce. He didn't know what came after Saturday, or what shape the thing between them was going to take, as it stopped being a thing that lived in texts and phone calls, and started being something that existed in the same physical room as his daughter, and his work, and his real daily life. He didn't know all of it, but he knew enough. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and for the first time in 6 weeks he fell asleep without his thoughts circling back around to all the ways this could still go wrong. The shareholders' meeting began at 9 in the morning on the 28th, in the 44th floor conference room of the Sterling Capitol building, with 17 people seated around a table that cost more than Logan's truck and the combined contents of his office. Victoria knew the room by heart. She'd been in it hundreds of times, for good news and bad news, and the particular kind of neutral news that looked like good news until you read the footnotes. She'd sat at this table when the company had its first 9-figure quarter. She'd sat at it when a development deal collapsed and took 14 months of planning with it. She knew exactly how the morning light came through the east-facing windows, and how the acoustics changed when the table was fully occupied, and which chair the most difficult board member always chose, because it put his back to the door, and he believed that made him look powerful. She sat at the head of the table and did not perform confidence. She just had it, or more precisely, she had clarity, which was something close enough to confidence that it functioned the same way. The board members filed in and found their seats, and the ones who had pushed hardest against her in recent weeks arranged themselves with the careful positioning of people who had prepared a script. She let them open. She let them set the stage, establish the agenda, and begin. She sat with her hands folded on the table and her expression neutral and listened to the first 40 minutes of the meeting. The financial summary, the Caldwell District update, the perfunctory going through motions of a formal session, and did not interrupt. Then she spoke. She went through the 5-year capital plan first, in enough detail that every number was real and every projection was defensible, and nobody at the table could claim afterward that they hadn't understood the direction. She walked through the Harlan Street revision, the Garner Port outcome metrics, 3 other initiatives that had returned more than projected. She talked about the Caldwell District development with the specificity of someone who had lived inside that project for 18 months and knew every load-bearing question it contained. She was not performing. That was the thing that changed the room. They'd been prepared for a defense, for the managed tone of someone protecting a position. What they got instead was clarity. A person who knew exactly what she'd built and was simply telling them the truth about it. When she finished the operational section, she paused, poured water from the carafe, drank. "I want to address the other matter," she said. The room went still in the particular way rooms go still, when the subject everyone has been circling finally gets named. "Over the past 6 weeks," Victoria said, "the personal question, my private associations, has been used as a vehicle for a board challenge that was never really about my judgment. It was about leverage, and I want to be clear that I understand that, and I want everyone in this room to understand that I understand it." She looked at the 3 board members who had pushed hardest. They didn't look away, because they were professionals, and professionals don't flinch in these rooms, but something shifted in their posture. "What I will say about my personal life," Victoria continued, "is that it is mine. I have built this company for 22 years, during which time I did not ask any member of this board to account for their marriages, their relationships, or the people they chose to spend their private hours with." She let that sit for a beat. "I extend the same consideration to my own life, and I do not intend to retract it." One of the 3 board members, a man named Hargrove, whose pocket squares were always too white, and whose opinions were always delivered as if they were facts, leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, no one is suggesting you don't have a right to a personal." "Then we agree," she said. "Good." She moved on before he could find the next sentence. "The contract offer to Hayes Restoration has been fully accounted for by the community group who arranged it. That documentation is in your packets, page 14. I'd ask anyone who used that offer as evidence of compromised judgment to review page 14 before the vote." She watched Hargrove pick up his packet. She watched him turn to page 14. She watched his jaw settle into a particular flatness that meant he had found the information and was processing the fact that the foundation of his argument had been removed without ceremony. She felt something that was not quite satisfaction, something more honest than that. The quiet of a person who held to the truth long enough to watch it become visible. "Any other business?" she said. No. The vote was not close. 13-4 in favor of the existing leadership structure, which was as close to unanimous as that room ever produced on anything. The 4 dissenting votes came from predictable places and signified mostly that those 4 people would need time to adjust to the fact that the campaign had not worked. Victoria noted them without malice. People in rooms like that rarely change their fundamental positions. They just recalculated their approach. She'd deal with that when it arrived. She walked out of the conference room at 12:47, went to her office, closed the door, and sat in her chair. The room was quiet. The good acoustics, the wide windows, the city spread below in December gray. She sat there for a while without doing anything, not reviewing notes, not fielding calls, not calculating the next move, just sitting. She thought about Logan saying, "You're in the gap," and she thought that this was it, the gap. The held space between the last thing and whatever came next, where it was just her and the quiet she'd said she wanted, and the question of whether she actually knew what to do inside it. Her phone buzzed. How did it go? Not a question. He already knew it had gone well because she was texting, which meant she was intact. 13-4, she typed. A pause. Then, "Tell me about the 4. She almost laughed. She typed back later, "I'm in the gap." "Good," he wrote. "Stay there a while." She set the phone face down on her desk and looked at the window and thought that she was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely in her own life. Not managing it from a slight distance, not running the numbers on it, just in it. It was uncomfortable. It was also, she thought, the correct kind of uncomfortable, the kind that meant something real was present and real things had weight and you had to adjust your footing. She sat in it for another 20 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and called her assistant and cleared Saturday afternoon. Saturday came with thin winter light and cold that was serious about itself without being theatrical. The kind of cold that made the city feel more real, sharper edges, cleaner air, fewer people performing comfort they didn't feel. Logan had not told Maisie much. He'd said a friend was coming to visit, and they would go somewhere together, and Maisie had received this information with the same careful nonchalance she'd been practicing since Monday, which he recognized as the behavior of someone who cared very much and was attempting not to show it. She was dressed when Victoria arrived, which was notable because Maisie's standard Saturday state was pajamas until noon, a habit Logan had stopped fighting. She was wearing her yellow sweater, and her hair was in two braids that were slightly uneven because she'd done them herself and refused help. Victoria knocked at the apartment door at 2 o'clock. Logan opened it. She was in a dark coat, simple, her silver-threaded hair down. She looked slightly uncertain, which was the first time Logan had seen that expression on her, and which he found, without expecting to, deeply reassuring. The visible evidence that this mattered to her, that she hadn't arrived performing. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. It was the least sophisticated exchange they'd had in 2 months, and somehow the most honest. Maisie appeared at his elbow. She looked up at Victoria with the full focus attention she reserved for things she was seriously evaluating, and Victoria looked down at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Logan had the particular tension of a parent watching his child make a first impression in both directions simultaneously. "You're the lady," Maisie said. Victoria blinked. Then, "I suppose I am. Daddy said you know about buildings." "A little." Maisie appeared to weigh this. "I know more," she said, not unkindly. "Maisie," Logan said. "That's probably true," Victoria said. Her voice had a quality Logan hadn't heard before, slightly careful, slightly warm, like someone trying a step on uncertain ice and finding it solid. "Will you teach me?" Maisie considered this with the gravity of a person being asked to take on a mentee. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." Logan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Victoria was looking at him with an expression that said she was actively suppressing a real laugh and that she found his daughter somewhat extraordinary. "Come in," Logan said. Tub. He had planned to take them to the Ellsworth building. He'd arranged it with the weekend site crew, cleared the scaffolding on the ground floor, set up a section of the restored lobby that was far enough along to be safe and interesting. He wanted Victoria to see it, not as a professional presentation, not as an investor tour, just as a place. Maisie informed them in the car that she had a different plan. "I want to show her mine," she said from the back seat. Logan looked in the rearview mirror. "Your what?" "My building." She said it with the ownership that children use for things that are entirely in their heads and entirely real to them. "The one I showed you." He understood. 3 months ago, on a Saturday, he had taken Maisie to see the Aldrich Theater, a restored early 20th century building on the south side of the Arts District, the first project he'd ever completed independently, finished 8 years ago when he was 24 and working on a budget that made him physically anxious to remember. He'd taken her because she'd been drawing it from photographs, and he'd wanted her to see the actual thing. She had not forgotten it. "The Aldrich?" he said. "Yes." He looked at Victoria in the passenger seat. She was looking forward, and he could see the slight smile at the corner of her mouth. "I don't know this building," she said. "Then you should see it," Maisie said, with the tone of someone closing a discussion. "Daddy made it." He didn't argue. He drove to the Aldrich, upset. The theater sat on Aldrich Street in the Arts District, which was not the wealthiest part of the city, and had never tried to be. A neighborhood of small galleries and repair shops and restaurants that had been there since before anyone thought the area was interesting. The kind of place that had survived 3 waves of gentrification by being too authentic to flip cleanly. The building itself was 3 stories of restored pre-war brick, with arched windows on the upper floor and a restored terracotta entablature above the main entrance that Logan had spent 11 weeks getting right because the original detail work was crumbling and he refused to replicate it in anything that wasn't period correct. The marquee lights were period-appropriate reproductions. The lobby doors were original hardware, rehung and resealed. It was a Saturday evening by the time they arrived, and the theater was between performances. Dark inside, but with the lobby lights on, casting warm amber out through the glass doors. The marquee was lit. Maisie got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked up at it. "See?" she said to Victoria. "The arches." Victoria stood beside her and looked up. Logan stood slightly back and watched both of them. "The terracotta," Victoria said slowly. "That's original?" "Reproduction. The original was deteriorated past restoration. We matched it from historic photographs and period catalogs." He moved to stand beside them. "Took about 3 times longer than we budgeted." "It shows, in the good sense." "The windows are original glass," Maisie said. She was pointing up. "Daddy says old glass has bubbles in it. You can see them if the light is right." Victoria leaned back slightly to look at the upper windows. "Does it?" "Wavy glass," Logan said. "Pre-war single pane. You can see the distortion along the edge when the light catches it." He paused. "Maisie spent about 30 minutes looking for the bubbles last time." "I found 7, Maisie said. "She found more than I expected," Logan said honestly. Victoria looked at the building for a long moment. He watched her face, really watched it, because this was not the professional look she brought to property assessments. This was something else, something that was taking the building in for its own sake, the way he took buildings in when nobody was watching and there was no agenda attached to it. "You were 24, she said. 24 and terrified, he said, but the building didn't care how old I was. It just needed someone willing to do it correctly. Most 24-year-olds would have cut corners. I cut some corners, he said, just not the ones that mattered. She turned and looked at him. The amber light from the lobby was on her face, and the December cold had put some color in her cheeks, and she looked he thought, with a directness he didn't try to manage, like herself. Not the gala version, not the board meeting version. Just the person who had said, "I want the room to be quiet" at a charity event 2 months ago and meant it with everything she had. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "It's a decent first project." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Minimize it when someone is trying to tell you it's good." Her voice had an edge to it, not harsh, firm. "It's remarkable. Accept it." He held her gaze. "All right," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Maisie had moved to the door and was pressing her face against the glass to look at the lobby. "Can we go inside?" she said. Logan checked his watch. He had a key. He'd always had a key to the Aldrich, a courtesy kept up by the current management, a small piece of consideration he'd never asked for and that mattered more than he'd ever said to anyone. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Yeah," he said, "we can go inside." The lobby was everything he'd put into it at 24. The restored plaster ceiling medallions, the period tile floor in a pattern he'd sourced from original archive photographs, the brass fixture sconces along the walls burning warm against the dark of the unoccupied house. It smelled like old wood and plaster, and that particular quality of air that historic buildings held, a kind of density, as if the years were still present in the atmosphere. Maisie immediately went to the center of the lobby and turned in a circle, looking at the ceiling. This was what she always did here. It was, Logan had come to understand, her way of orienting herself inside a space, finding the highest point and working down. Victoria moved slowly. She read the space the way a reader reads a text, carefully, with attention to what was being said between the explicit statements. She stopped at one of the sconces and looked at the plasterwork around it. She crouched slightly to look at the tile edge near the baseboard. "The transition here," she said, pointing, "between the tile and the baseboard, that's a very clean joint." 50 attempts, Logan said. "I did that section myself. I fired and rehired the same tile contractor 3 times. He kept getting it wrong? We kept getting it wrong together. The last time I just did it myself." He looked at the joint. He watched me do it and then did the rest of the lobby correctly. Victoria stood up. "Is that how you usually teach?" "It's how I learned." My first boss showed me once and then stepped back and let me make the mistake until I could feel what was wrong. He looked at the floor. You can't learn this work by being told. You have to feel the failure before the correction makes sense. She was quiet. He thought she was still looking at the floor, but when he turned, she was looking at him. I've been thinking about that, she said. What you said, about the buildings, how you can see all the history in them, the different repairs, the different periods. She paused. I think that's how you see people too. Meaning what? Meaning you don't write off the damage. You read it. She held his gaze. You looked at me at that table and didn't see the obvious surface. You looked for the load-bearing parts. He thought about the first night. The way she'd looked at the room with that accustomed tiredness. The way she'd surprised herself by laughing. The way she'd said, I want the room to be quiet, like it was the most complicated admission she'd made in years. You're not hard to read, he said. You're just used to people not trying. She looked at him for a long moment. Maisie was still in the center of the lobby, now lying flat on her back on the tile floor, staring straight up at the ceiling medallion, which was an experience she had apparently decided was necessary. Maisie, Logan said. I'm looking at the ceiling, she said, without moving. I can see that. It's better from down here. Victoria looked at the small figure on the tile. Something crossed her face. Something soft and complicated. Not maternal exactly, but adjacent to it. The look of someone who wasn't accustomed to being around children and was discovering that children were something different from what they'd anticipated. Is it? Victoria said. Maisie turned her head to look at her. Come see. A pause. Logan watched Victoria consider this, and the consideration lasted about 2 seconds before she walked to the center of the lobby and lay down on the tile floor next to his daughter, in her dark coat and her good boots, and looked up at the ceiling. Logan stood there. He did not have language for what he felt in that moment. It wasn't something that came with a clean name. It was specific and private and had the quality of things that matter, the weight of them, the way they land differently than the things that don't. He looked at the two of them on the tile floor, his daughter with her uneven braids and her yellow sweater, pointing up at the plasterwork and saying something he couldn't quite hear, and Victoria beside her looking genuinely up with the particular attentiveness of someone discovering that the best view of something they'd been trying to understand was from this angle, the one they'd never thought to take. He did not think about the board meeting or the photographs or the commentary or the contract or any of the things that had made the last 2 months difficult. He thought about Daniel Frey saying in this city, that kind of decision is not common. He thought about Renata saying you matter, and Maisie matters. He thought about Victoria on the phone the night before the meeting, saying I've never had something I was actually fighting to keep. He stood in the lobby of the first building he'd ever restored and looked at the two people lying on its tile floor, and he thought that some things were worth the difficulty in a way that had nothing to do with the outcome and everything to do with what you find out about yourself in the process of not giving up on them. He walked to the center of the lobby and lay down on the floor between them. What are we looking at? He said. The center medallion, Maisie said. Victoria says the leaves are acanthus leaves. They are. I thought they were regular leaves. Acanthus is the Greek plant. Architects have used it as a decorative element for about 2,000 years. Maisie was quiet, absorbing this. Then, why? Because it's beautiful and it lasts, Victoria said. Things that are beautiful and last tend to keep getting used. Logan turned his head and found her looking at the ceiling, and the amber sconce light was on her profile, and she was not performing anything. She was just there, on the floor of an old theater, looking at leaves that had been carved into plaster 100 years ago by someone whose name nobody remembered but whose work was still holding. Daddy, Maisie said. What? I like her. A pause. I know, Logan said. Victoria turned her head. She looked at him across the small distance of the tile floor, in the warm light, in the quiet building. Her eyes were very direct and very open, and had in them the particular expression of someone who has put down something heavy and is only now beginning to feel the absence of its weight. I like her too, Victoria said, quietly, to Logan, meaning something larger than what she was saying and both of them knowing it. Maisie appeared satisfied. She went back to studying the ceiling. Logan looked at the plasterwork and felt the building around him. The years of it, the different hands that had worked on it, the music and the voices it had held inside its walls. He'd been 24 when he finished it, terrified and broke and certain about almost nothing except that the building deserved to be done right. That part hadn't changed. They were there for 2 hours. Maisie found 9 bubbles in the wavy glass of one of the upper lobby windows, which was a personal record. She showed Victoria each one. Victoria looked at each one. Logan watched this from across the lobby and did not intervene. At some point, he wasn't sure when exactly, Maisie took Victoria's hand to lead her to the next window, and Victoria led her without ceremony, without the slight stiffness people sometimes had around other people's children. It was just a hand and a smaller hand and a 7-year-old saying, "Come look at this one," with all the authority of a person who knows exactly what's worth seeing. They left at dusk. The city was going dark in layers, the low buildings first and then the skyline finding its night shape, lit from below and within. Maisie fell asleep in the back of the car before they'd gone 4 blocks, which was the specific exhaustion of a child who has been very socially competent for several hours and has nothing left. Logan drove, and Victoria sat beside him, and the city went past the windows, and neither of them spoke for a while. It was comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. "She's going to remember today," Victoria said, quietly enough not to wake Maisie. "So am I." A beat. "So am I," Victoria said. He drove, and the city moved around them, and he thought, not for the first time but with more clarity than before, about the nature of the things that actually last. Not the polished things, not the things that are easy or frictionless or arrive without cost. The things that last are the ones that were built correctly, with patience, on honest foundations, by people who understood that the work itself was the point. He thought about what he wanted to say, and when he was going to say it, and whether now was the right time. The city gave him no guidance. He pulled up outside her building, the glass tower on the north end of downtown, which he had looked at from the outside before, and was now, he realized, beginning to think of as a specific place rather than an abstract one. He put the car in park. "Victoria." She had her hand on the door handle. She paused. He looked at her. She looked back. "I know we haven't named it," he said. "I know we've been careful and the timing has been wrong and there's been a lot happening." "Logan, I just want to say it clearly," he said. "I'm not uncertain about this. Whatever this is, I'm not uncertain about it." She was very still. Outside, the city moved in its perpetual way, indifferent and constant. "I'm not either," she said. Her voice was low and even and had nothing performed in it. "I haven't been for a while." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a grand moment. It was 2 people sitting in a car outside a glass building in December while a 7-year-old slept in the back seat, saying something true to each other simply, without theater, and meaning all of it. She got out of the car. She leaned back in through the open door and looked at Maisie, sleeping with her cheek pressed against the window and her braids slightly undone. Then she looked at Logan. "Thank you," she said, "for today." "She'll want to show you more buildings," he said. "I hope she does." She closed the door. He watched her go inside, and then he sat in the car for a moment in the December dark, with his daughter asleep behind him and the city making its endless sound, and thought that this was where he lived, in the real, specific, imperfect texture of his actual life. The tight budgets and the sight problems and the school pickups and the evenings texting someone who asked good questions. The buildings that needed more time than the budget allowed because doing it right was the only way to do it. He pulled away from the curb and drove home. The months that followed were not uncomplicated. It would be dishonest to say otherwise, and dishonesty was one of the things this story had never been able to afford. The board situation settled into a different equilibrium. Hargrove and the others recalibrated and kept their positions, but understood their leverage had changed. There were still column inches written about Victoria and Logan, still the occasional comment section catastrophe, still the low-grade noise that accompanied anything that didn't fit neatly into a predetermined story. He was too young. She was too powerful. The age gap was a liability. The money was the real subject. Someone always had a theory. They stopped reading them. Not dramatically, not as a decision made together in a conscious moment. They just gradually stopped checking. The noise existed and they existed, and those two things didn't have to be in constant dialogue. Hayes Restoration finished the Ellsworth building in the spring. 18 months of work, 4 financing crises, 1 replaced contractor, and Logan's personal credit stretched to a place that had made Renata age visibly. The opening was small. Local press, community members, some grant administrators. The 7 names from Daniel Frey's group, who attended without ceremony and shook Logan's hand with the particular warmth of people who have watched something they believed in become real. Victoria was there. She stood in the restored lobby with a glass of cheap wine from the catering table that Logan had not been able to upgrade without embarrassment, and she looked at the ceiling and the floor and the cornice detail that he'd spent 3 weeks getting correct, and she said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You should be proud of this." "I'm relieved," he said. "Proud comes later." "It'll come." It did. Slowly, the way good at things usually did for him. Not in a single clear moment, but in the accumulation of smaller ones. A letter from the Westfield Cultural Fund that used the word exceptional. A call from a historic preservation organization asking about a larger project in the warehouse district. Renata coming into the office one Tuesday morning with a spreadsheet that showed, for the first time in the firm's history, a cash position that wasn't making her nervous. He stood in the Ellsworth lobby alone one evening after everyone had gone, in the last of the day's light through the restored windows, and felt the building around him, fully itself now, finished, holding everything it had always held plus everything they had put into it. He thought about what he'd said the first night, at table 11, that he looked at buildings like that and saw everything that had happened inside them, all the people who came through those doors without knowing they were making history. He thought the same was probably true of lives. You didn't know, while you were in them, which moments were the ones that mattered. You couldn't always see the structure you were building while you were inside the construction. You just had to do the work correctly and trust that what you were building would hold. It was Maisie's idea. That was the truth of it, and Logan would say so for the rest of his life when anyone asked how it happened. He had thought about it. He had been thinking about it for months, in the way you think about something you already know the answer to but are still looking for the right moment to say out loud. He hadn't found the moment. He'd been waiting for clarity, for the perfect configuration of timing and circumstances, for the feeling that everything was settled enough to add the weight of a question that large. Maisie solved this problem for him on a Thursday evening in October, 13 months after the gala, by walking into the kitchen while he was making dinner and informing him that she knew where the ring was. He turned from the stove. "I'm sorry?" "The ring." She said it with the patient clarity of someone explaining something to a person who is being slow. "In the box in your sock drawer. I found it 2 weeks ago." He stared at her. "I didn't touch it," she said preemptively. "I just looked." Maisie. "You should give it to her at the theater," she said. "She loves that building. She told me she thinks about it." She reached past him to take a piece of carrot from the cutting board. "I'll take her there. You be there already." "You'll—" He stopped. "How exactly are you going to take her to the theater?" Maisie chewed the carrot. "I'll ask her to take me. I'll tell her I want to show her the bubbles again." She was entirely matter-of-fact, the way she was about most plans she'd already fully constructed. "She'll say yes." "You've thought about this." "For a while," she said. "Are you going to say no?" He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, 8 now, with her straight-ahead opinions and her building drawings and the way she'd looked at Victoria the first afternoon, and said I like her with the simple finality of someone who had decided and was done deciding. "No," he said. "I'm not going to say no." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her homework. He stood at the stove and thought that Maisie was still the most competent person in their apartment, and that this had probably always been the plan, and that the best thing he had ever done was raise someone who looked at the world and saw clearly what was worth keeping. It was a Saturday in late October when Maisie texted Victoria. She had her own phone by now, a development Logan had negotiated carefully, and said she wanted to show her something at the Aldrich. Victoria replied within minutes. She always replied to Maisie quickly, which Logan had noticed and filed away in the place where he kept the things he didn't say out loud. They arrived at the theater at 4 in the afternoon. The fall light was low and amber, the kind that gilded old brick and made everything look like it had been there for 100 years, which the Aldrich had. The marquee was lit. Logan was inside. He'd been there for an hour. He'd walked the lobby twice, checked the sconce light quality, looked at the tile floor he'd laid himself at 24, and found it still correct. He stood near the center of the lobby when he heard Maisie's voice outside. The door opened. Maisie came in first, talking about the windows, which was a performance Logan recognized as deliberate misdirection. Victoria came in behind her, in a coat he'd seen before, her hair down. She was listening to Maisie with the full, genuine attention she'd given her since the first afternoon, and she didn't see Logan for a moment because Maisie was pointing toward the upper windows and talking about the angle of light. Then she saw him. She stopped. Maisie had already moved toward the windows, her role concluded, casually and completely. She knew exactly what she'd done. She stood at the far end of the lobby and became very interested in the wavy glass. Logan stood in the center of the lobby, in the amber light of the building he'd first made right when he was 24 and terrified, and looked at Victoria. She stood very still, and there was something in her face he hadn't seen before. Not uncertainty, not the careful management. Something open. Something that knew. He crossed the tile floor. He stopped in front of her. He thought about what to say and decided that the best thing, the true thing, was simple. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he said. "I think this is it." He reached into his jacket pocket. "I'm not going to tell you this is easy," he said. "I know it isn't. I know what you'd be taking on, and I know what I'm asking. I know my life is small in some ways. It's a tight firm and a specific kind of work, and a daughter who is going to run circles around us both." He paused. "But it's real. Everything in it is real, and the part that includes you is the realest it's ever been." Victoria's eyes were very bright. She was not crying. She was doing that thing she did sometimes when something landed in the undefended place, very still, very present, not managing anything. He opened the box. "Victoria Sterling," he said. "Will you stay?" She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Something moved across her face. Not a performance, not a calculation, just the actual feeling, arriving without protection. "You said stay," she said. "I meant it that way. Not marry me. That too. But mostly, stay." He held her gaze. "Stay in the gap. Stay in the quiet. Stay in the apartment when Maisie is arguing about bedtime, and in the coffee shop when there's no agenda, and in the buildings when there's something worth looking at." He paused. "Stay." She looked at him for a long moment. The amber light held them both. "Yes," she said. And then, as if once wasn't sufficient, "Yes." He put the ring on her finger, and his hands were not entirely steady, which she didn't comment on, and her hands were not entirely steady either, which he didn't comment on. And then she put both hands on his face and looked at him in the way she looked at things she was taking in for real, the full attention, the no calculation look. And he looked back. Maisie's voice came from across the lobby. "I found 11 bubbles." They both looked at her. She had her face pressed to the lower corner of the window, not looking at them at all, with the elaborate non-attention of a child who has done something successful and is being very professional about it. "Good job," Logan said. "I know," she said. Victoria laughed, the real one, the one that surprised her. And Logan felt it against his hands and thought that this, exactly this, was what all the difficult things had been holding up. Not a perfect version of anything. Just this, the real laugh, the uneven braids, the wavy glass with 11 bubbles, the building that had been done right by someone who was 24 and scared and refused to do it any other way. He had learned a long time ago, from buildings and from loss and from the particular education of raising a person who saw the world more clearly than he did, that the things worth having were never the things that came easily. They were the things you built carefully, in the right order, on foundations that could hold weight. They were the things you maintained, the things you kept choosing to get right even when the budget was tight and the timeline was impossible and everyone around you thought you were being unreasonable. He had also learned, more recently, from a woman who asked questions that went somewhere and stopped talking when she had nothing left to say, that the hardest thing was not the work itself. The hardest thing was trusting that the work was worth doing before you could see what it was becoming. They stood in the lobby of the Aldrich Theater in the October light, the three of them, in the building that had started everything and held everything, and Logan thought that some structures were built for exactly this, to hold things that mattered, to keep them safe and warm and present across the years, to be still standing when the people inside them finally understood what they had. He took Victoria's hand. She held it. Maisie came across the tile floor, slid her hand into Logan's other hand, and looked up at both of them with the particular satisfaction of a person who has been right about something for a long time and is experiencing the correct outcome. "Okay," she said. "Can we get food now?" Logan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. "Yeah," he said, let's go." They walked out through the lobby doors together into the late October city, and the marquee lights came on behind them as the evening deepened, casting warm gold on the sidewalk, on the brick, on the street that ran in both directions toward everything that came next. The doors closed. The building stood, as it had for 100 years, as it would go on standing, holding the memory of everyone who had ever come through it, every ordinary moment that had turned out, without announcement, to be something more.